A majority of young people in the United States are optimistic that it's still possible to prevent the worst long-term effects of climate change, according to a new poll among 13 to 29-year-olds from the PBS NewsHour and Generation Lab, even as many of them point to the multiple ways they believe climate change will affect their personal lives in the future. In the days since this poll was conducted, world leaders have gathered to attend this year's COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, Scotland, to make decisions that will help determine our collective future on this planet. Scientists can predict just how much warming is expected to increase over time and know what will help keep the most dramatic global warming at bay, and yet uncertainty reigns. Will countries make ambitious enough pledges to reach net zero carbon emissions quickly enough? Will they match their words with actions, as youth activists protesting in Glasgow are demanding? That feeling that we just don't know yet whether the global community will succeed may be reflected in this poll, which found that around a quarter of people are unsure as to whether there's enough time to turn things around. Samantha Burns, a 26-year-old from Kentucky, expressed optimism that its worst effects could be tempered through collective action, but acknowledged that the people who are trying to do something about it are still outweighed by people who just don't care and ain't doing nothing.
Burns, who said she didn't believe climate change would personally impact her own future, alluded to a sense of inevitability. The way I see it is, if climate change is going to continue to harm us, it probably ain't going to get no better, Burns said. So I mean, there's no use in not pursuing what you want to do. Graphic by Megan McGrew. PBS NewsHour. 58% of respondents said it is possible to prevent the worst long-term effects of climate change, 16% said they thought it is not possible, and 26% said they were unsure. That relatively high degree of uncertainty, 1 in 4 respondents, stood out to Martin Miromezani, who oversees polling as the Chief Operating Officer of the Generation Lab. He noted that the unsure option is often included in survey research, but that it's rare to see it exceed more than 10% or so of respondents to any given question. That uncertainty may speak to their candidness about how much they understand climate change, but also the open questions facing the scientific community, Miromezani said. That includes whether nations will make the right choices. Experts agree that coordinated international action to curb greenhouse emissions, particularly on the part of wealthier countries most responsible for generating them in the first place, is key to reining in climate change. But that doesn't necessarily negate the importance and impact of individual action. Sarah Ray, a professor of environmental studies at Humboldt State University, argues that there needs to be a middle ground that emphasizes why one person's choices are significant, but also doesn't let corporations off the hook. The climate movement has to come up with some good, understandable, believable, viable argument as to why you do matter, and also that corporations need to change. They are the most responsible, Ray said. Graphic by Megan McGrew. PBS NewsHour. Men were more likely than women to express the belief that climate change would not affect them personally. Susan Clayton, a professor of psychology at the College of Worcester, pointed to a consistent gender gap across the poll that suggested women were generally more likely than men to say that climate change would affect various facets of their future. It's consistent with the research that's been out there, Miromezani added. All 3 experts noted that women in general tend to be more actively concerned about the impacts of climate change, and they also are more likely to be disproportionately impacted by those consequences compared to men. 17% of white people reported believing that climate change wouldn't influence their futures, as well as 10% of black people and 4% of Asian people. Ray noted the broader reality of the ways that privilege, whether in the form of race, gender, income, education, or any other factor, can insulate individuals from feeling the true threat of climate change, which humans tend to perceive as amorphous in the first place. Climate change is connected to other forms of oppression and abuse and inequality in the world, and people who are experiencing those things are going to be much more attuned to the sources of their suffering, Ray said. All kinds of data shows that non-white people care more about climate change. Compared to the optimism that the planet can avoid the worst outcome, there was more variation among respondents when it comes to how the reality of climate change will impact everyday facets of their personal lives in the future. Graphic by Megan McGrew, PBS NewsHour. As an academic who works closely with environmentally minded university students, and who keeps an eye on research that looks at the younger generation's views, Ray said she assumed more respondents would have reported a belief that climate change would impact the personal choice categories laid out in the poll. Past research, she added, suggests that younger people tend to report higher levels of concern over climate change compared to their older counterparts. But she felt that didn't necessarily match the numbers of whether they think it will affect aspects of their lives reflected in the poll. That sort of puzzles me, Ray said. Americans are generally less likely to express concern about climate change compared to people in other countries, according to Pew Research Center. That finding is in line with research suggesting that people in historically colonized countries and marginalized communities within wealthier ones are both more likely to endure the consequences of climate change and believe its threats to be significant. Respondents to this poll were more likely to say that climate change would impact where they choose to live compared to other facets of their lives. In Ray's view, that disparity reveals a layer of privilege because deciding where you live involves a certain level of mobility and choice over the matter, which many in America have, depending on their wealth and resources. When it comes to categories like food, buying habits or the choice to rear kids, Ray said that the comparatively lower figures could reflect a broader unwillingness among some younger people to imagine any kind of deprivation, sacrifice, self-denial associated with everyday choices like changing one's diet or transit choices. To me, the data reveals people are not connecting the dots between their day-to-day lives and climate change, Ray said.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.